Hello and welcome to Unshakable with Human Design, everybody. I'm your host, Nicole Lano, and I am here with a very special guest. You know that I only bring you guests that actually serve what you come here to this show for, and I was so excited when I got when this person reached out to see if she could be on the show because Jessica Baum is a licensed psychotherapist. And when I read your bio, Jessica, I was sitting there and I'm looking at what drew you to your work. It says in your bio that, your journey began with a lifelong curiosity about the whys of life and why we feel, connect, and experience the world the way we do. And that you specialize in trauma, attachment theory, and interpersonal neurobiology. That's so near and dear to my heart because I took a different path from psychology in a formal way. I was an actor, and for all of the same reasons. Why do people do the things that they do? Why do people behave the way that they behave? What would make somebody do this thing? And thinking through that always was what drew me into my work. So I felt very much a kinship with Jessica when I read this in your bio. She's a certified addiction specialist. She has advanced training in EMDR, experiential therapy, CBT, and DBT. And her best-selling book, Anxiously Attached: Becoming More Secure in Life and Love, has established her as a trusted authority on healing attachment wounds and building secure, fulfilling relationships. And your new book, Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank
Your
you for
new book,
having me.
I'm so happy to have you here. Your new book is called Safe, though, correct? That is the new one that is coming out. What is the date that your book drops?
October 28th, and
Fantastic.
it's Safe, an attachment-informed guide to building more secure relationships.
Yeah. So, what did I not cover in that bio? Welcome to the show. Did you want to introduce yourself to the audience? Is there anything that you'd like them to know before we kick off? I have so many questions for you.
No, I mean, I'm just a psychotherapist who, like you said, studies interpersonal neurobiologies. I specialize in couples work. I run a team of people, and we focus on healing attachment wounds and helping people get more conscious and have more fulfilling relationships.
It's such deep work. And I think once you see attachment theory and attachments in relationships, you can't unsee that. It's one of those things that I've found to be so eye-opening and interesting because I was saying to you before we started recording, on this show we get a lot of entrepreneurs, we get a lot of founders, we get a lot of people who are in business, and they come here to understand how they relate in their business because entrepreneurship is never just about the business. You are the business. Your stuff is going to be the business's stuff. So it's best for you to clean up your stuff if you want things to run smoothly in your business. And I have found that codependency it exists in businesses. Attachment theory exists in businesses. These attachment relationships, our relationship with our business, I think, can be usually mirrors a lot of the relationships that we have in our lives. So I'm very excited to talk with you and have this conversation around what you do and what you've found with people just in relationships. Tell everybody what attachment theory is and what attachment styles are.
Yeah, so attachment theory is like the studying of connection, and it's a really well studied science from the 1950s. And so it's how we adapt to our primary caregiver. And there are four different categories, although in my book, you understand like you can have many different, I call the wheel of attachment. You can move in all these categories, but there's secure, anxious, which I wrote the book Anxiously Attached, avoidant, which is on the other end of the spectrum. And then it's called fearful, avoidant, or disorganized. I refer to it as disorganized and safe because that's the scientific word. But depending on how your primary caregivers were connecting with you and the sense of safety that you had, and I go into deep depth, we store these patterns inside of us. So like if you're anxious, you're always kind of living with some fear that the shoe's going to drop. The hallmark is uncertainty. If you're avoidant, sometimes you can feel smothered in relationships, or the fear of losing yourself. If you're disorganized, you really struggle with being close and being apart. Like you struggle in different ways depending on what patterns you have internalized from your earliest experiences. And they live in your nervous system. and they show up in your adult life in your romantic choices, but absolutely also in your relationship to your business, in the relationship to anyone who's close to you, who's important to you. Your adapting way of staying in connection or dealing with conflict or fear will show up in those primary relationships.
And then if you look into like what the behavior looks like, this can look like if you are avoidant, then you might find yourself distracting yourself from things. You might look to get away from closeness. You might look to get away from responsibility. I think it's helpful if we can let people know a little bit about what that looks like in their daily life. How would they know that they have an anxious attachment style? How would that play in their everyday life?
Yeah, so I think, like I said, anxious, the hallmark is uncertainty or unpredictability. So you're feeling like the shoe's going to drop. If you have an anxious pattern that's dominant, you have a conscious fear of abandonment. So you usually know that that's somewhere in your history. You tend to overextend yourself because your parent came in and they weren't co-regulating with you enough in the way that you needed. You usually leave your body to regulate your primary caregiver. So
Mhm.
are you're more likely to self-abandon as an adult, and you'll know, like, for example, like I know what my dog needs sometimes before I know what I need. Like, you're very sensitive to the room. You know what other people's needs are because when you were younger, in order to stay in connection as someone who developed more of an anxious base, if your mom was sometimes stressed out, sometimes available, you're always attuning to her. So you're leaving yourself and you're attuning. And I mean, I don't like the word codependency, but anxious attachment would be more of a clinical word of how you adapted and why you need to stay close to others in order to feel safe and that conscious abandonment wound. The other side of the spectrum, a true avoidant, and there are things called avoidant protectors, which are different than true avoidance. But avoidant babies, their parents didn't emotionally show up at all. They physically showed up. They might have checked the boxes, but they weren't emotionally connected to their child. So the child learns that, like, I'm not going to get my emotional needs met. Performance and success are more important in this system. Maybe mom or dad is there, but they just don't know how to attune in that way. So they grow up and they tend to be more independent and struggle with empathy and learning some relational skills. That's a true avoidant. And remember, all of this is on a continuum and is nuanced. And I explain the attachment wheel in the book so that you really you get an understanding. And then fearful or disorganized is an infant that got stuck in cycles of my parent is scary. Either they're completely checked out or they're violent or angry, but I need them anyway, because in order to survive as an infant, we must stay in connection. So these individuals can get stuck later in life, like really deeply longing for closeness, but also being scared of that closeness at the same time. So, everybody's different. We can store pockets of disorganized. We can have avoidant protectors. We can show up more anxious in our romantic life, but more avoidant in our work life, right? And so it's very nuanced and it's very complicated, but these patterns are very well researched and it's a very well documented science. And when you start to understand them, I think it like creates like some conscious awareness and some understanding, and then you can start to obviously work on healing the patterns.
And do you ever see people shift from or display multiple attachment patterns? Do you see people that have in some situations avoidant and in some situations more anxious or disorganized? Can someone move? Disorganized sounds to me like and 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 maybe this is just my own way of hearing it, but I've always thought disorganized sounded like a more extreme sort of state that where there's sort of this jumble of things that's happening. Am I incorrect in thinking that, or because it's almost like I could see someone going from disorganized to maybe one of the others as a step in the quote unquote right direction?
Yes and no. I mean,
Yeah.
yes, I think that if you're looking at the wheel of attachment, which is in safe, secure is down here, anxious is over here, avoidance over here, and on top is disorganized. As
Hmm.
you move up the anxious, like as a parent becomes more and more anxious, maybe angry and rageful, we get slip into disorganized.
Mm-hmm.
As a parent moves up the avoidance scale and maybe checks out completely and is neglectful, we get up to disorganized.
Mm-hmm.
So as you move up the sides and you increase the avoidance or the anxiety, you get up to pockets of disorganization. Now, with one parent, you can have secure experiences, anxious experiences, and sometimes disorganized experiences. In one romantic relationship, you can also move within the wheel as well. So, but we typically can say, oh, my dad was avoidant, he wasn't emotionally there for me. But maybe there were these occasions where he connected deeply for some reason with me, and I have these secure pockets. Or I had a pretty secure childhood, but like my parents forgot to pick me up one day, and I had this experience where my body got lit up and I got really scared, and there's just this little pocket of disorganization.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like we have different experiences, and then attachment is a two-way street. So it'd be like, Nicole, your attachment system and my attachment system meet, and then our relational dance has its own way of doing its dance together. So if you're more avoidant, I might show up more anxious. If you're more anxious than me, I might show up more avoidant. It really it's so nuanced, and it depends on who we're attaching to. But usually we pull in people or recreate our familiar in certain situations. So if I had a very avoidant father, I might be attracted to very avoidant men, right? Because that's my familiar, and so that's what we tend to gravitate towards.
It's like you read my high school diary. I felt like when I started to hear about these theories, it made so much sense to me because I just said this to someone today. I was like, oh yeah, I dated my father, not literally, but figuratively. I dated somebody exactly like him, and for many years, from like my high school boyfriend, and we kept dating on and off into my early 20s. That was a learning experience for me, and I think I was able to find how insecure I was through that relationship to understand that this pattern needed to end. Sometimes a pattern needs to be so overt in your face that in order for you to see it. And I didn't know anything about this work back then. But then it's very funny. Then I became someone actually in HR in my corporate job when I worked on Wall Street, and I burned out there. She was the one who really opened me up to the idea of codependency in which is really just, attachments, unhealthy attachments, insecure attachments. That codependency, she gave me a book on codependency that was out then, and I read it and I was like, oh my God, this is what I've created here. I've created this validation system, just looking for this elusive love that I'm chasing constantly. It was the avoidant. It was that feeling of like, I need this in order to feel whole, in order to feel safe. Only you never feel safe because it's never quite there. It's fascinating. What is it? So you talk about like how they can use this to heal. What does that healing process look like from the perspective of your book and what you take your patients through?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good question. I mean, I think there's a lot of literature out there right now on attachment theory and, understanding the styles, but I don't think there's anything that quite explains what does it mean to heal an attachment wound.
Yeah.
And and I talk about it at length in the book, but our attachment system wounds live in our body, in our gut, in our heart, in our fascia, in our nervous system. That's how we store memory. And I dive deep into like the memory systems and how sensations are memory and how we store sensation as memory when we're young. And, this memory is always with us. It's always scanning our environment. It's always letting us know if we're safe or we're unsafe. And it's based on our experiences. So if I grew up with a really avoidant father and you do something like you check out on me right now, my system might light up and say, oh my God, this isn't safe right now because Nicole, who I'm depending on right now, is not connected to me in this moment. And we'd have to have a close relationship probably for this to get activated. But my system would remember, oh, this feels familiar and this feels unsafe. So we would start to see where we get lit. Where do we get lit up in our work relationships, in our intimate relationships? What is our body telling us? what parts of our body are being activated or shutting down on us. And then we can start to understand, like, how are these patterns showing up in our adult life and when did they start in our early life? And we kind of can make the connection between the two. And healing attachment patterns means we go to the core of the wound. So if it's abandonment, we meet it. If it's shame, we start to accept it and we start to hold the original experience and receive from another nervous system what we didn't get at the time. So we're witnessed and we receive what we didn't get. So that wound can start, or that memory system can start to change. And so, in the presence of a safe relationship and in the context of healing and building interoception, so starting to understand our body and the way that wounds are stored in our body, through the safety of you and I, we can re-experience things. We can go into the body. We can hold these things, and we can neural nets open in our body. Our system gives us more streams of information, and we can start to move things out of the body up into the right hemisphere and integrate into the left. So I very much unpack the science of healing attachment wounds, because I think it's important to know that this isn't just woo-woo. This isn't just like heal your inner child. This is how memory is stored. This is why our body is speaking to us. And let's not keep repeating these painful dynamics. Let's get ahead of them and start healing them.
Yeah, I mean, it sounded to me like what you were describing is like somatic therapy. Feel the feeling. Is that kind of what you were talking
Yeah,
about? Being
somatics for sure. Yeah, I mean, being in your body, being embodied, having an embodied
Mhm.
experience of what you went through and kind of getting in touch with that.
Right. And I see this with, with, like I said, when I work with entrepreneurs, I'm working with the whole human. It's such a holistic way because I can talk to you about your messaging, I can talk to you about your business, but if you're in fight, flight, that's usually what's creating the problem. It's not a strategic issue that we have a lot of times. It's an energetic issue or an emotional issue that's causing people to not operate as the best version of themselves, not go after what they want because they are afraid. Where does that fear come from? And I always find that, the best path is going through the feelings. What don't I want to feel? What am I afraid to feel? What am I feeling right now? And something that was coming up for me as you were talking and, talking about these different ways of them expressing and how do we heal this is, I noticed that a lot of people will almost use some healing modalities as like a crutch, that it's almost a way of avoiding the feeling.
Hmm.
And because that doesn't feel safe, so it's like they run to, like, I teach breath work and I have, I do EFT, and some people will use that almost like a crutch, almost like, well, I tapped 6 times today, and it's like, well, why are we tapping 6 times? Let's come back to, like, what are we feeling here? And so much of it is that it doesn't feel safe to feel the feeling, so I'll do anything but feel this feeling. and
Yeah.
and I will be grabbing at these different tools, and sometimes the tools can be a way of avoiding the feeling themselves as well.
Yeah. I mean, in chapter 3, I talk about protectors, and I think that we need them. We all need ways to avoid what's going on inside. And I would never take someone's protector away from them. But in the presence of safety and someone who can help you feel, which likely this person didn't have that as a youngster and
Mm-hmm.
doesn't even know what that experience really is like. But through experiencing what's going on in your body together over and over and over again, you will need your protectors a lot less. And in the meantime, if you need your protectors, whether that's going for a run or a glass of wine at night or smoking your vape, like, I get it. We all have protectors, whether we're conscious of it or not. And thank God we have them, because often feeling is too hard. And it's definitely too hard for individuals who don't have the experience of being joined in their feelings and need to avoid to protect themselves.
When you say protectors, are you explain that a little bit about what protectors are? Are they coping mechanisms, or are you looking at them more from like an internal protector?
Um, well, protectors are anything that we do in order to help us cope and survive with what's going on. And some of them are glamorized, like we could work out a lot, and some of them are not, like, using drugs or alcohol. But It could be going for a run. And it's not to say that these things are bad or good, but when we're struggling with what we're feeling inside and we reach for something or we do something to try to just help ourselves in the moment, it's considered a protector. Some people hate their protectors. Like I had a client before this, and one of her protectors is her eating disorder, right? Or someone's OCD. And like it's hard to like reframe it, but they can feel like they're making us miserable. But the truth is, they developed in a way to protect us from something deeper around core wounds. And so until we have the right support and really can go there in terms of feeling the original wound and understanding that, they're working really hard to try to protect us. And we need them in place until we're ready to kind of re-experience and go there.
Yeah, it's almost be grateful for the tool or for the thing that the part of you that kept you safe all of these years, that allowed you to keep going and keep living your life and be, the member of society that you've been. Like, you got here, congratulations. And
Right.
these parts of you allowed you to do that, these protectors.
Absolutely. I mean, I workaholism, I talk about it in the book. It was one of my protectors. I don't know if I talk
Mhm.
about it. I have a client who was sexually abused and she couldn't talk to anyone, so she started smoking pot at like 12 or 13. And my first response was, thank God you had the pot,
Mm.
because she had no place to go. She had no place to process anything. Yes, okay, addiction kind of followed her later and we had a lot of work to do. But like we develop these things in order to cope. And the last thing we need to do is like beat ourselves up for the ways in which we're coping. But we need to start to see, what are they really protecting us from? That's the question.
Yeah, and I think that we tend to think about these things from, like, that it has to be sexual abuse or some sort of like big T trauma, but small T trauma is just as valid, and we all have it. We all have something, like we all have something. It's just, were we raised in a place where we felt majority safe and secure most of the time? But like I think back to, you bringing up, smoking pot and stuff. Like my teenage years and the stuff that I was doing, these were outlets for me to feel like I could come out of my shell. I felt like I walked on eggshells all the time. I felt like I was so careful, and these were a way for me to be free. And what's very interesting about like the journey with those things, I know some people have addiction issues. I fortunately didn't have that, but I think it was because I did work and I didn't need them anymore. And the
Mm-hmm.
relationship to that protector changes. So I think that that's a similar thing to what you're talking about. And I think that it's important for people to know that there's no shame in this work. This is, I really do think that this is the way that we're finally all getting comfortable having these conversations. I think they're being more accepted on a wider level now, to recognize that we have stuff and we want to live a more free life. And freedom comes from security and safety in our body.
Mm-hmm. And if we didn't get enough of secure holding when we were little, we walk around the world feeling scared and anxious. And so we must heal that by re experiencing safety and security and re internalizing that as inner anchors.
Yeah, I look at my husband, and he has very secure attachment for the most part. Like, he's just sort of a grounded guy, good dude. No one's perfect. I'm not saying that he's Mr. Perfect, but he just has a sense of self,
It's
and
nice.
and I think that his parents, gave him what he needed throughout his life. And my parents had stuff going on, largely my father. And I look at how my husband has allowed me to find safety in my home, in my body, in my life. That, and so much of that is physical touch. So much of that is just, like when I have a bad day, to go and hold him, and to feel safe enough to say, I'm feeling scared right now. I'm feeling what I'm feeling right now. And to feel that met with understanding and love and acceptance, versus, feeling like, you shouldn't feel that way. Buck up, which
Right.
is, That's why when I've gone through the attachment styles, I'm like, I feel like I've had moments with all of them. I've had times with all of them. What is it that you find most common with people as they're going through this journey? Because I know that people are listening to this show right now and they're listening to us talk and they're trying to figure out where do they start with this. Obviously, your book is going to take them through all of it.
Uh-huh.
But, and again, the book is called Safe. The what are they looking for in their life? What are they looking for in their daily? Sorry, let me back up for just a second. What if somebody is sitting alone in their home? What if somebody actually feels alone where they don't have, because you were saying physically having another nervous system to help regulate you. What if they don't feel like they have that?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a problem in our culture and society, and I talk about that. Um, in order to heal early attachment wounds, what was wounded in relationship needs to be healed in relationship. And so I'd be misleading your audience if I said you can buy my book and all the healing in the book, you can heal yourself in your apartment alone. That is just simply not how the science works. And so I talk about finding your anchors in the book. And I talk about what you need it doesn't necessarily need to be a therapist or a coach, but it needs to be a person in your life who is non-judgmental, who can hold space. I talk about the science of what holding space really means through nervous system holding, and can hold space for you as you step into this work. And that you need to have these disconfirming experiences. You need to have people in place in order to heal very early attachment wounds. You might be able to heal later wounds a little bit more with inner child work as you get further down in the work, but the earlier wounds have to be experienced by another nervous system in order to move them. And I think, a lot of people, I write self-help books and it's like we live in a world where it's like help ourselves. The truth is, like, true healing happens when we have true interdependency, like what you described with your husband. He is secure enough for you to have internalized some security within you. You don't need to do it in a romantic partner. I actually did a lot of my healing with a therapist, and I also have friends and clients who find anchors. And if you go through your Rolodex, I talk about in the book how to co-anchor for people so that you can do this work with other people. If they're not too dysregulated, you can find co-anchors, but that the healing is in the sharing and the re-experiencing and the getting in touch with your body and the somatic work. And it just isn't done alone. You just can't really do it alone.
Yeah, I have found, and I don't know if this resonates for you, but I found sometimes in my own practice, like with the clients that I work with, some people feel so alone that they can't see the potential for connection around them. And they're not exercising the opportunities for connection because the wound is so deep. And taking that first step can be so hard and feel so terrifying, honestly. And I notice it. I look at it through, I use human design to kind of help me deliver the message and of what maybe someone needs to hear. So like you're a 2-4 pure generator is what we call it. And the 2-4 is like your profile. And yeah, then generators. 2-4s are generally, they tend to keep to themselves as a personality type, meaning they're the hermit. They kind of get energy through sort of their alone time. But on the opposite side, we have a 4 where connection is necessary. They are social beings, but it tends to be more of like an unconscious thing. The social connection, they know they need it, but their outward personality sort of says like, "Nah, I'll just stay home." But the 4, every line, every number has kind of a shadow to it. And the 4 shadow, the wound of the 4 is abandonment, is this feeling of being abandoned. And it cuts so deep. We can all have an abandonment wound, but for a 4 to have one, it goes against opportunities come through people. Opportunities come through trusting people and trusting that they will help you. And if that fundamental is broken, then that wound cuts so deep because it feels so core to them. And I find that it can be very difficult for a lot of them to trust again. and to lean on communities or on safe spaces. What do you do if you find a client or a patient who is resistant to making those connections?
Yeah, I don't know if that actually describes me, believe it or not. I think
Uh-huh.
I'm actually really good at reaching out. But it does describe more of an avoidant attachment, I would say. Someone who is wants connection badly, but really struggles with the vulnerability of reaching out. And maybe I've experienced that a little bit in my life, but the truth is I'm like the first one to raise my hand and say I like need help. So I don't know,
That's a high expression of this. There's that's someone who's in a good place with
mm,
it gives us a mechanism to say this is what a shadow expression looks like, and
I see.
this is what a higher expression looks like, and where do you fall
Hmm.
on that spectrum, and then something to work with. It sounds like you are in a good place with your four, where you're like, no, 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 I'm good. Like, I know that, people are sort of the lifeblood of my life.
Yeah, and I mean, people who have anxious attachment as their primary or default, they tend to reach out for help even when they don't need it. So we're the
Mm.
first ones to raise our hand, where people who are more avoidant tend to like sit back a little and really struggle with the vulnerability of reaching out. And I have experienced that too in my life. I would say, even with some of my clients, like when they're in a regress place or they're struggling, sometimes they'll just send me a text and I've experienced this, and I'll just send a text back and I'll be like, I'm right here. Like, I'm with you. I might not be in the room with you. You might not have internalized me yet. You might still feel alone in this experience, but just that limited connection helps them feel like they're not alone in this regress place in their life. And I truly believe we need that in terms of healing. We need to know that the people that we're depending on are there, even if they're not perfectly there, even if I'm not available all the time. Like, I am holding energetic space for you, and I am here with you, helping you re internalize what secure attachment feels like.
Yeah, and I think that that's why these conversations, are you finding, like, I think it's important to let people know what the landscape looks like, because if this is your first step into this, it might take a little bit of time for you to start to feel safe enough to ask for the help, to, if you're avoidant, that there's I think sometimes people think I'll read a book and I'll feel better, like
Right.
that will be it. um, what do you usually see with people as far as like the way that they approach the work when you see somebody have a lot of success with healing their attachment, their unhealthy attachments or unsafe attachments? What does that look like as far as, I don't want to say how much time, but what are marks of success for you, where you see people who take to the work really well versus the ones who struggle to really show up for it?
Yeah. I mean, I have people who quote unquote struggle and like 5 years later are in the work. Like, everybody's just where their system needs to
Mm-hmm.
be. So I never like to look at it through that lens. But I feel like if I am working with someone and we're kind of going into the work, they're usually getting dysregulated, but they're also gaining some conscious awareness of their memory system and actually what it felt like to be little. Not just a logical understanding, but like starting to get into an embodied sense of what it felt like to get to be little. Their response time changes. So after a period of time with enough co-regulation and holding space, they can have a witnesser in them that sees different parts of themselves, that communicates differently, that's in touch with their body and isn't as reactive in the world. So like, as we're working together, there's just more space and compassion between what's coming up inner or out of them and how they're reacting to it and the choices they have when those experiences are showing up. And so that's a usually good indicator. Like, I can tell you, like, I have one client, I saw her today, and she's up and down in the beginning as memories coming up, but like she has more space in her body.
Mm-hmm.
She feels more alive. She's got more life force. And so it's a roller coaster ride, but there's more life force kind of coming towards her. So sometimes the re-experiencing is really hard though. I mean, that's why they call it the work. Like it's not easy, but if you're listening, like it's not supposed to be done alone. And I think I put so much science into safe. So I think understanding the science kept me grounded as I moved through the work. And it kind of is this extra support to know that like you're not crazy if you're feeling all these things. This is what's happening in your body. And the science just helped ground me as I moved through my own inner world.
Yeah, I love that you brought up, that people are where they are, and you just have to honor and respect where you are in this moment, and that the work is the work in front of you. Because the reason I asked is I know that there's somebody listening to this show right now that feels like they should be further along. That, oh, I've been healing forever, it can feel like. And a lot of times I can find that they've just been battling that avoidant attachment or that anxiousness, that they've found another way, another mechanism to kind of avoid or to go into, they're getting triggered into fight flight, and they haven't figured out, I don't love the term figured out, but they haven't progressed enough in the work to be grounded yet. They haven't felt safe. And I find a lot of people look to put like a time frame on this type of work, and there just isn't one, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, if you're listening, what I think you're talking about, Nicole, is that people are like, here I am again, or here's the same theme showing up, or how could I have made the same choice again? And that's happened to me as well. I don't really know a person that it hasn't happened to, but this is essentially why I wrote the book. Like, we have core wounds. We will repeat them. We will recreate them in our life over and over and over again. And it's really frustrating because we will go out into the world depending on our wound, and we will look to confirm it. See, she
Yeah.
doesn't love me.
Mhm.
See, he's too busy for me, right? And we will keep confirming these belief systems of I'm not worthy, or I'm not lovable, or I will be left. And like, it's not manifestation. It's literally our fears attracting what we know and then recreating it. And if you're listening, we've all been there, myself included. Healing it means that we have to go to the root of it. So like, if the wound is I'm going to be left, or I'm unworthy, we have to go to the beginning of, when did you feel this? Where do you feel this? What was that like? We have to grieve. We have to be with the original experience, because that experience lives inside of us. And instead of feeling it, we're reenacting things that we think are protecting us from it. And ironically, we end up feeling it again. So we have to go there, and we have to start to be conscious of like, oh, if my wound is I will always be left, and I keep picking partners that when their trauma is activated, right? Like if it's an avoidant, they flee, fight, flight, flee. They're fleers. So then my core wound's like, look, here I am again with another person who's fleeing when I'm scared. And that's because I'm picking people that match the wound, and then I'm recreating it. Instead of going back and saying, oh my God, I actually was a little neglected in my childhood. I was kind of emotionally left by my parents. No one was really there for me. Can I go to that original experience with someone and actually be with reality, versus picking someone who I think is going to meet my needs and not bring this up in me? And unfortunately, it gets recreated and recreated. So I think part of the book is to get conscious, is start to be conscious of what these core wounds are, where they live, how they're getting recreated, so that we can start healing them, so that we're not stuck in, quote unquote, we call it trauma bonds or reenactments that keep us miserable.
Yeah, and I think that we're just re-triggering our fight flight response consistently, and so it becomes this. I think you call it like it's a silent sort of pattern that we're in. It's a silent. I look at it energetically. I'm like, we're energetically connecting to this thing that we don't want. So now we're going to get more of what we don't want. I see this with people when I think about this. I see people who have this relationship with like social media, where they'll almost, that abandonment wound will come up because they put something up and they don't get the reaction that they want, and they feel abandoned all over again. And they feel like nobody likes me, nobody's responding to me, nobody's meeting me where I'm at, nobody is buying, nobody's engaging. We've sort of created this world with social media now where if these strangers aren't responding to us in the same way, I see that in my work where I see people having old wounds be triggered, and then they go and they never, this is where someone is active for a bit and then they go and they disappear. And they're always too busy to do the thing that will actually help them grow. And
Right.
it's because of an inner wound that they have that they're not looking at. I always say triggers are gifts. If you can
Yeah.
look at it that way, and you can look at, like, if I'm triggered, to be curious about what I'm feeling versus being critical of myself or just going off in an automatic pattern, some sort of thing that you've always done, then you can start to find the pieces of all of this and start to get clues as to maybe where it started or to what you need to do to heal it. You need to feel all of these things and sit with it. And that was what I was getting from that somatic. Just trauma gets stored in the body. We have to free it from the body. We have to feel it we have to sit with it long enough to say, like, okay, guess what? I'm feeling this and I'm still here. I'm still safe.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in the book, I reframe from I switched the word trigger to awaken or
Mm,
activated, so that every time you're quote unquote triggered, you're really awakening. A younger
mm,
part of you is awakening. Now we can change the relationship to what's happening in your body. And as this experience is happening in your body, I never look at fight or flight as a bad thing. I look at it as your body is brilliantly adapting to something that's scary. And I can be with this experience, but there's a good chance that I might not be able to be with this experience. It might be so dysregulating for me. I might not have the ability to regulate my system. And this is where co-regulation comes into play. This is where I'm being activated and I need someone else's window of tolerance. I need somebody else's nervous system to hold my awakening activated parts with me, to help me actually understand what they are so that I can learn to be with this because my parents never were. Because I don't actually have the capacity to be here and to sit in it on my own. I actually need the support. And I didn't even know that that's what I needed. So I'm spinning my wheels constantly trying to say, oh, just sit with it when I don't even have the capacity to hold, to have a window of tolerance to hold this. And I literally need another person to help me hold my internal world because that was something that I didn't receive as a youngster.
yeah. And so, what would you say to somebody who is, besides buy your book, which obviously they're going to go do? We have it all linked up for you in the show notes. But so they're going to buy your book, but then somebody who is currently on their own, what would your advice be to them? And then what would your advice be to somebody who does have access to people, but maybe how do they find the right people to
Yeah.
lean on?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've done so much work in a relationship. I've done so much work out of a relationship. I talk about finding your anchors in the book and what that really means, but it takes one relationship, one healthy relationship that responds to you with their nervous system more in a ventral state of safety, that holds your experience. It takes one relationship to change the trajectory of your whole life. So it does give hope. I'm not saying you still need to have a relational experience to transform some of these inner experiences, but it only takes one. And for me, I mean, I did some work with my partner, but really it was my therapist, and it was my mentor. And then I grew more experiences because my nervous system started to recognize what emotional availability really was. So
Mm.
I was gravitating towards people who weren't emotionally available. And then once I started to invite emotionally available people in, and they started to hold stuff for space for me, then my nervous system was like, oh, okay, I'm going to start to recognize this. And then I pulled energetically, I can pull in more of that over time. So I would think that there are support groups out there. Listen, there are a lot of support groups out there, and there are a lot of people in these support groups, and some of them, some people can hold space and some people can't. There are a lot of therapists out there that can't hold space. So really, you're looking for individuals who are patient, who are non-judgmental, who aren't going to try to fix you, who don't have a big agenda with you, who can meet you where you are, right brain to right brain, and be with you, literally be with you. And when you have an experience of a friend or someone in your life who has the ability to sit down on the sofa and say, like, you're in a bad place, Nicole, and instead of trying to fix you right now, I'm just going to be with you.
Mm.
And it's the being with that is the healing. And so when we get into the work, it's the being with that starts to heal. A lot of quote unquote codependent trauma bond is if this person could just act differently, I might be okay. Or if I could fix them or heal them or whatever. But in the healing work, it's not about them. It's about, can we be with you? And can we be with these parts of you? And can we turn inward and start to do that? I'm also a couples counselor. And I truly believe that a lot of healing can happen in relationships. And I am an imago therapist. And if you're listening and you have a partner and you want to find a great couples counselor, I highly recommend imago therapists. You can search them, IMAGO, or emotionally focused couples counseling. Those are the two modalities that I highly support. But that we attract our people who have positive and negative traits of our primary caregivers, and that through doing the work together, we can also become conscious and heal. But you do need two willing people if you're listening. So if your partner isn't willing to do the work with you, you can still do the work with another anchor. And I really kind of dive in deep. And there was a point in my last relationship where we were doing the work together and he decided he didn't want to anymore. And I was continuing to do my individual work, and I just continued. And two things can happen. I could have stayed in that relationship and his behaviors wouldn't have bothered me as much. Or I decide that he can't meet my needs and, walk away from the relationship. There's no right or wrong, but you always have the agency to do your own work regardless. My hope is that you can do work within the context of your relationship that's bringing up the work. But regardless, you can bring that work to another anchor and start to get in touch of what the core wounds are and what the attachment patterns are that are awakening in this relationship, and use that as a portal into your own healing.
Yeah, because it sounds like what you're really looking for is, it's almost like you're proving to your nervous system that safety exists in another person, that you're meeting these fears and consistently creating this example of the opposite of what your internalized wounds are saying.
Yeah, I think that people want safety, but they usually attract their familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people, when they first experience true safety, are freaked out because it's so new to them. And the vulnerability that comes with safety is actually what brings up the work. So a lot of people will say, oh, I want the nice guy, or I want the really emotionally available guy. That guy shows up or that girl shows up and it's like, I don't know what to do with that because this is so unfamiliar with my nervous system. This is not what I'm used to. So I'm going to go to what I know, right? And so by picking anchors, and it doesn't have to be romantic partners who are emotionally present, by understanding that and by doing the work with them, your nervous system is now learning what true safety is, what true emotional regulate capacity and co-regulation is, what true attunement is. And so we need to experience that in some safe container in order for us to say, okay, I need to reorient to this rather than to my familiar, or a critical partner, a critical parent, a tough, high intensity chaos. All of those things that I keep finding myself in are my familiar. We need to reorient, and it's the reorienting that's actually really hard. And it's relearning what true safety really is.
Yeah, I absolutely did that. I wasn't able to trust that, that a guy could be safe for, earlier years where, I've have those people that showed up and they had it all together, and there was always a reason why they weren't right. But
Right.
the reason was never really made sense. It was just sort of like, I don't know, there's just a feeling. And it's like, the feeling was that this is not firing with my wiring,
Right.
which says that it should look like this. It should look like somebody who is emotionally unavailable. It should look like somebody who is kind of, backhanding compliments at you and making you feel bad. That's we go to the familiar. It's true. So, so,
I
oh,
want to say something like I have a tag on my book. So it's an attachment informed guide to building secure relationships, but it's also coming home to yourself and others. And I tell this story in the beginning of the book about this relationship, and I like hugged him for the first time, and I just felt like I was home. And he brought me home to my childhood trauma. And I don't have any regrets. I still love this person deeply, and I have a place in my heart for him. But he was so much my familiar that I hugged him and I was like, oh my God, I'm home, which felt like it feels like I'm amazing. And then, years later, you're like, oh my God, I am literally recreated my childhood home with this person. So, like, the irony in all of that is kind of like, I think most people, like most people I talk to who come to me, they're like, why did I do this? And it's like, we all do it to a degree. Like, we all do it.
well, I like I said at the beginning, my high school boyfriend that was basically like my dad, like exactly the relationship and exactly the same. He stuck his finger in all of those same wounds. He knew exactly where those buttons were. And there was a reason for that. But I also, there was a long time where you can go through the like, oh, all the years I wasted. What if I wasn't attached to this relationship? What could I have done? I said no to this because he was in my life. I could do that all day. And I did. I had my pity party and looked back with longing about like what could have been if the sliding doors I had chosen a different one. But when I look at it, I'm like, I might still be in that pattern if it wasn't so in my face, if I didn't see it so clearly. It took a while, but I was also kind of done with at least a lot of that work of facing it and showing me what the path looked like and where I needed to go, in my early 20s rather than it being, I know a lot of people that are still in their patterns well into their 40s, and there's no shame in that. But I look back on it and I'm like, I could be grateful too
He's
for the
kind of
fact.
the guy who woke you up, right? And
Yes,
like, I feel like
uncomfortably.
I said to my mentor, who, for your audience, there's a recording for them about how to move from insecurity to security. My mentor, she's 82. She's studied interpersonal neurobiology like years more than me, and she's fascinating. So I want your audience to have that. But I said to her, like, did I have to go through these hard experiences, devastating experiences to awaken to my trauma? And she said, no. Had you had a really good therapist early on, or you really knew, some of this, the right therapist would have gotten in there faster. And so I think that's kind of why I have the book, because like I don't want people to spend another 5 years of their life, or even if you know you're in the pattern, it's hard to leave. And the book explains why it's hard to leave. The book explains why it can take years to leave, but at least you have the information. I remember at a certain point looking at my partner and I was like, he's so unavailable in this moment, just like my dad. And now I'm going to start to make this about my dad rather than him. And I actually detached from the pattern and started to focus on my inner child work. And I remember him, he was like, wow, you like took yourself out of the energetic field of this cycle. And I was like, yeah, because this isn't really about you right now. This is about what you're bringing up in me. And it totally unlocked us. So I just want people to have these resources so they can get out of these cycles. Like you said, like so many people are miserably stuck in these cycles just with no real understanding of how to like break the paradigm.
Yeah, it's an unconscious thing, I think, for most people. And even
Mm-hmm.
if you're conscious of it, you're not conscious of necessarily how many connections it's making to this thing until you go into the work. So I encourage everybody, please, please, please go order this book. It is called Safe. You can get everything on Jessica's website. So if you go to jessicabaumlmhc.com/interview, we will link this all up in the show notes. So you don't have to
Mm-hmm.
remember that, but I'll tell you that in case you're typing. Go there because you have some free resources there. The interview that you were talking about with your mentor, correct? And then,
Yeah, and then beyond the label, so the attachment wheel right away, so you can start to see the wheel of attachment and start to identify with those. You'll get those in your email box. Check your spam, but you'll get them the second you fill out the form, and then when you get the book, you'll have both that, and the conversation is what it feels like inside your body to go from insecurity to security. And my mentor, I did none of this alone. I've had so much support in my life. I've had so much support in creating the books that I have. I've been so influenced by the most amazing people, and she's been an amazing influence for me. And I wanted people to experience her. So that's why I put that video in there.
That's amazing. And I honestly, like, I can't stress to you enough, if you're listening to this and you find that you are not getting the results that you're looking for in your life, that you feel like you are fighting yourself, and that I think there's usually a deep sense of like, I know, to me, I always knew like the mountain is me. The battle is inner for me. And if you fall into that category, digging into this work and the way that Jessica's structured this, it's in such a, I don't want to say simple because it's complex, but it's not complicated. Just the way that she's broken this down and help you understand these patterns in your life and how you can start the process of unwinding them. It's never too late, and this work will unlock all sorts of windows and doors that you maybe didn't even know were there.
Yeah.
This is the work that started to set me free. So I truly, truly hope that everybody buys this book.
I really, really appreciate that from you, Nicole. And I love your story because it deeply resonates and it shows how one relationship can truly help unlock safety. And you had the other patterns and you were able to like redirect and have a, a more secure base now in life, which is, if you're listening, I think that's what everybody wants. We want to feel like we have space inside, we want to be expansive, and we want to have relationships that truly nourish and sustain us. And getting to them might be a little bit of work. So I'm so happy to have had this conversation with you.
Same. I feel the same way. And I think that for those of us that have been on both sides of it, been on the unsafe and found our way on the safe, there's nothing that you want more for people than to have them experience what it feels like on this side of what safety can feel like, because it's really life changing. So I'm so honored that you came on the show, that you shared with us. Please go buy her book, go to the website, buy all the things, and grab all of those resources that she has available for you. Thank you for being here, Jessica.
Yeah,
I
thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank
And
you so
thank you,
much.
listener, for making it to the end of this episode. We appreciate you. And remember, in order to have an unshakable business, you must first become an unshakable human. So thanks for letting us help you become unshakable with human design. We will see you next time.